The dorm hallway was unusually quiet that night, the kind of silence that makes every footstep echo a little too loudly. Sarah's heels clicked against the linoleum floor as she fished around in her bag for her keycard, the dim yellow lights overhead buzzing faintly. She had been out at a small party, nothing wild, just friends, music, and a little too much soda. The night air still clung to her skin as she finally found the keycard, swiped the lock, and pushed her door open with a creak. Her dorm room greeted her with its usual mix of familiarity and faint loneliness. The unmade bed with a pile of textbooks on one side, the desk lamp left tilted from an afternoon study session, and the faint smell of laundry detergent from clothes drying on the rack. She shut the door behind her, turning the lock with a satisfying click, and exhaled as though she had just sealed herself into safety. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A friend had sent her a string of laughing emojis, probably still joking about something from earlier in the night. Sarah tossed her bag onto the chair and slipped off her shoes, sighing in relief as her tired feet pressed against the cool floor. She didn't bother changing. Exhaustion hung on her like a heavy coat. She flicked the desk lamp off, leaving only the bluish glow of her phone screen to guide her as she crawled beneath the covers. The bed creaked softly under her weight. She shifted onto her side, scrolling aimlessly through social media feeds, not really reading anything but too restless to put her phone down. The room around her grew darker as her eyes adjusted. The only sounds were the faint hum of the mini fridge and the occasional car passing outside the window. For a few minutes, it felt like she was the only person in the world awake, wrapped in her little cocoon of blanket and dim light. Then she heard it. At first, she thought it was her own breath, the slow inhale, the quiet exhale. But beneath that, almost hidden, was another rhythm. Slightly uneven, a little heavier, like someone else was breathing in the same room. Sarah froze, her thumb hovering over the phone screen. Her pulse quickened in her ears. She listened harder, holding her breath to see if it was just her imagination. The other sound didn't stop. A faint wheeze, followed by a soft release of air. Too steady to be pipes, too deliberate to be the fridge. She sat up a little, pulling the blanket around her shoulders, and glanced toward the door. Still locked. The window, closed. Her gaze swept the shadows of the room, but everything was where it should be. Her chair with her bag slumped over it, the desk stacked with books, the laundry rack leaning against the wall. She shook her head, telling herself it was nothing. Just tiredness playing tricks. She lay back down, shifting uncomfortably, the phone slipping in her sweaty palm. The glow of the screen cast pale light across the sheets, and she focused on it, scrolling faster as if distraction could drown out the sound. But the breathing didn't fade. It grew more distinct the longer she listened, low, slow, and close. Her chest tightened. She pulled the blanket up to her chin like a child hiding from the monster under the bed. The thought slipped into her mind uninvited. What if it really is under the bed? She tried to push it away, forcing herself to think of logical explanations. Maybe her roommate had come in earlier and was asleep already, except no, she remembered clearly that her roommate was gone for the weekend. She was alone. The phone buzzed again. She startled, almost dropping it, before seeing another message flash across the screen. Her hand trembled as she typed a quick reply, forcing herself to breathe normally, pretending everything was fine. She tucked herself deeper under the blanket, convincing herself she could sleep, that she was just paranoid. Her phone slipped from her hand this time for real, tumbling silently off the side of the bed. The screen lit up the floor for a brief second, throwing shadows across the room. With a groan, she leaned over the edge, reaching for it, cursing under her breath. Her hair fell across her face as she stretched her arm into the darkness beneath the bed. And then she froze. In that fleeting glow of the phone's screen, she saw them. Two eyes, wide and glistening, reflecting the faint light back at her. Staring, unblinking. Her blood ran cold. Her hand jerked back instantly, heart pounding so hard she thought her chest might burst. She scrambled up onto the mattress, pulling her legs tightly against her, the blanket clutched around her shaking body. Her breath came in ragged gasps now, louder than anything else in the room, and for a moment she didn't dare move. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of her racing pulse and the faint hum of the fridge. The phone lay forgotten on the floor, its screen dimming until the room fell into complete darkness again. Sarah didn't know if the eyes were still there. She didn't know if the breathing was real or just her imagination anymore. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was not alone in that room. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and lavender, the way it always did when Mia came home from work. She slid her key into the lock, twisted it, and stepped inside with the same tired shuffle she repeated every weekday. She flicked the light on with her elbow, balancing her purse and grocery bag in one hand. Everything looked ordinary, too ordinary. The neat little couch sat against the wall, her stack of unread mail perched on the coffee table, and her favorite throw blanket still draped over the armrest. Nothing seemed wrong at first glance, but her chest tightened anyway, that faint prickle of unease that had been haunting her for the past few weeks. She closed the door behind her and set the groceries down on the counter. Her eyes scanned the apartment without meaning to, like she was checking for something she couldn't name. The curtains were open again. She stopped mid-motion, her hand frozen on the grocery bag. She was sure, absolutely sure, she'd closed them before leaving. She always closed them. A habit, she'd told herself. She hated the idea of anyone peering in from the street below. Yet here they were, wide open, exposing the entire living room to the world. Mia stood there, motionless, trying to convince herself she'd forgotten. Maybe she was more rushed this morning than she realized. She dropped her gaze, pulled the curtains shut again, and forced herself to unpack the groceries. The sound of rustling bags filled the silence, a hollow sound against the weight of her thoughts. She was imagining things. That's all it was. Everyone forgot little details. But it wasn't the first time. Last week, she had found her chair slightly angled away from the desk, even though she distinctly remembered pushing it in. Another day, she came home to see her closet door ajar when she never left it open. And 2 nights ago, she'd woken at 3 a.m. to the faintest creak in the hallway, like weight shifting against the old wooden floorboards. She told herself it was the building settling. Old apartments made noises. Old apartments tricked people. She poured herself a glass of water and carried it into the bedroom. Her purse landed with a soft thud on the nightstand, and she kicked off her shoes, trying to relax. She picked up her phone, scrolling through messages, letting the mundanity of it settle her nerves. A friend had sent a photo from their lunch last weekend, everyone laughing. Normal life, normal things, no reason to feel unsafe. But as she set her phone down, she noticed something on the edge of her dresser. A piece of paper. She frowned and picked it up. The air drained from her lungs when she realized what it was. It was a photograph. Not just any photo. It was her, lying in bed, her head tilted against the pillow, hair spread across the sheets. Her eyes were closed. She was sleeping. Mia's fingers trembled as she held it closer, staring at the details. The photo was grainy, taken in low light, but unmistakable. Her own face, the same blankets she was using right now, the curve of the nightstand beside her bed. This wasn't an old photo. This was last night. Someone had taken it while she slept. Her knees weakened. She stumbled back onto the bed, the photo crumpling slightly in her tightening grip. Her first thought was denial. Maybe it was a cruel prank. Maybe one of her friends thought this was funny, sneaking in and taking a picture to scare her. But no, no one had her key. She lived alone. Only the landlord had a spare, and she couldn't imagine why he would ever. Her breath quickened. The photo trembled in her hands. She whipped her head toward the window, toward the closet, toward the bathroom door half cracked open. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Was someone still here, watching her right now? She tried to listen over the rush of her own pulse, but all she could hear was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the other room. Mia's instinct screamed at her to run, to leave everything behind and bolt out the front door. But her legs wouldn't move. She sat frozen, the apartment around her suddenly unfamiliar, hostile, like it belonged to someone else. She gripped her phone with shaking fingers and debated dialing the police. What would she even say? That she found a photograph of herself? That she thought someone might have been inside? Would they believe her? Her mind flashed to the open curtains. The chair. The closet door. Each tiny memory that she'd brushed off, stacked now into something undeniable. She hadn't been paranoid. She hadn't been careless. Someone had been here. Someone had been watching her. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed thicker now. She glanced at the closet again, the narrow strip of darkness between the doors looking impossibly deep. She told herself to stand, to grab the phone, to leave. But she was rooted in place, her breath shallow, the photo crumpled against her palm. Every creak of the old floor felt amplified, every whisper of wind through the window frame felt like movement. She could almost hear her own heartbeat pounding against the walls. She forced herself to count, to breathe slowly, to think rationally. She should call someone, her sister, her best friend, anyone. But her throat felt tight, her voice trapped. She stood finally, shaky on her feet, and moved toward the door. Every step felt like walking through water, heavy and slow. Her hand wrapped around the knob, and she paused, listening again. Nothing, just silence. But silence no longer felt safe. Silence felt like waiting. She opened the door and slipped into the hallway, her body tense, every nerve on fire. Behind her, the apartment stood still, quiet, but she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching from the dark. She gripped the photo tighter, the edges digging into her palm. Mia didn't know if she'd ever step back inside. But she knew one thing for certain now, her home wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to whoever had been there in the night, camera in hand, waiting until she was too deep in sleep to know. The apartment seemed to shrink around Mia as she stood in the middle of her living room, heart hammering in her chest. The photograph still shook between her fingers, the glossy paper damp from the sweat on her palms. She stared at it one more time just to make sure her eyes weren't lying to her, but the image didn't change. It was her face, slack with sleep, her body sprawled in her own bed. Someone had been here. Someone had stood close enough to her pillow to capture the curve of her breath. The silence of the apartment was unbearable now. It pressed in on her, thick and suffocating, as if it were waiting for her to move. Every shadow looked alive, every corner a mouth that might open and swallow her whole. She had always thought of this place as safe, her tiny sanctuary from the world outside. Now it felt like a stranger's house, as if the walls themselves had betrayed her by letting someone slip inside. Her phone sat on the nightstand, inches away, but she couldn't bring herself to grab it yet. If she called the police and nothing was here, if it was all in her head, they'd dismiss her as another paranoid woman living alone. But the photo was real. She could feel the sharp corners digging into her palm. She needed proof, and the terrifying thought slithered into her mind. She had to check. Her eyes darted to the closet. It loomed at the far end of the room, its door slightly ajar, a sliver of blackness inside. Her throat tightened. She had seen too many movies to know what might be waiting. But what if someone was inside right now, crouched low, holding their breath as she had earlier? She took a step closer, her bare feet whispering against the hardwood. The boards creaked under her weight, the sound making her flinch. She reached the closet door and pressed her hand against the wood. It felt warm, as though it had been touched recently. She took a sharp breath, pushed it open quickly, and jumped back. Clothes swayed slightly on their hangers, whispering against one another as if something had disturbed them. Her shoes were neatly lined on the floor, untouched. Nothing lunged out. No figure emerged. Just stillness. Yet the faint scent of sweat lingered beneath the fabric softener, human and wrong. She stepped back, shoving the door shut harder than she meant to, the sound crashing through the room. Her pulse wouldn't slow. She moved next to the window, her eyes scanning the latch. It was still locked, but the faint smudge of a fingerprint shone in the glass when the streetlight outside hit it just right. She swallowed, her stomach flipping. She didn't remember pressing her hand there. Mia backed into the hallway, her eyes flicking toward the kitchen. Every instinct screamed to run out the door and never come back, but she couldn't shake the dread that someone was still inside. She had to know. The kitchen was darker, shadows stretching across the counters like fingers. She stepped in slowly, flicking the light switch. The sudden brightness made her squint, but the room revealed itself in perfect stillness. The counters were clean. The groceries she'd unpacked earlier sat in their places. The knife block gleamed under the fluorescent bulb. She noticed one of the knives sticking out at a slightly different angle, its handle smudged. She told herself she was imagining it, that she must have brushed against it, but her gut said otherwise. She moved toward the bathroom, her bare feet cold against the tile as she pushed the door open with the tips of her fingers. The mirror reflected her pale face, wide eyes staring back. The shower curtain hung half-drawn, thick and heavy, concealing the tub. She froze in the doorway, bile rising in her throat. If anyone was hiding, this was the perfect place. Her hands shook as she reached for the curtain, every cell in her body begging her not to. She grabbed it anyway and yanked it back in one motion. The empty tub glared up at her, clean and harmless. She sagged against the sink, her legs weak, relief flooding through her even though her heart hadn't slowed. She pressed her palms against the counter and tried to breathe. For a moment she almost convinced herself she was alone. Almost. Until her gaze caught something on the edge of the sink. A hair. Not hers. Short. Coarse. Dark. Her chest constricted, panic crashing over her. Someone had been in here. Recently. The air in the apartment grew heavier, thicker, as if someone else was sharing it with her. She tiptoed back into the hallway, gripping the photograph like it could protect her. Her phone waited on the nightstand, but between her and it stretched the darkened living room, shadows pooling like liquid. She swore she saw movement in the corner, a shift too smooth to be a trick of the light. The walls creaked softly, almost like a sigh. She forced her legs forward, each step a battle. She reached the nightstand and snatched her phone, fumbling with the screen as she tried to unlock it with trembling fingers. A bead of sweat slid down her temple, her breath ragged. She dialed 911, but froze before pressing call. Her ears strained, her body rigid. There it was again, breathing, not hers, low, steady, and close. It wasn't coming from the closet, or the bathroom, or the kitchen. It was coming from somewhere behind her. The couch, the hall, the bed. She turned slowly, her phone clutched tight, the photograph slipping from her other hand and fluttering to the floor. Her heart stopped. The blanket draped across the couch shifted, just barely, like something underneath had moved. Mia's scream caught in her throat, her body too paralyzed to make a sound. She wanted to run, to throw open the door, but her legs wouldn't respond. The breathing grew louder, deliberate, like whoever was under there wanted her to know. The phone slipped from her fingers. The screen cracked against the floor. She didn't pick it up. She finally bolted for the door, fumbling with the lock, wrenching it open with a sob. She ran into the hallway barefoot, the cool air rushing against her skin, leaving the apartment door wide open behind her. Inside, the blanket on the couch shifted again. Mia didn't stop running until her bare feet hit the cold tile of the building's lobby. The night guard behind the desk looked up in alarm as she burst through the stairwell door, her hair wild, her chest heaving like she'd sprinted miles. She tried to speak, to explain, but only broken gasps spilled out. The guard came around the desk quickly, hands raised in caution, trying to calm her. "Miss, are you hurt? What happened?" She could only shake her head, shoving the photograph into his hands with trembling fingers. His brows knit as he held it closer to the light, and his face shifted from confusion to dread in an instant. That was all the confirmation Mia needed to know she wasn't insane, she wasn't imagining this. Someone had been in her room. Someone had been watching her. The guard ushered her behind the desk, his voice steady but urgent as he called the police. She crouched down against the wall, pulling her knees to her chest, shivering though the lobby was warm. Her mind kept replaying the sound of the breathing, the sight of the blanket shifting, the photo of herself asleep. She hugged her arms around her body, as if she could protect herself from the memory of invisible eyes. Minutes crawled like hours until the distant wail of sirens cut through the night air. Red and blue lights bled into the lobby windows, and soon officers filled the space, speaking in clipped tones, their presence both reassuring and terrifying. One knelt in front of her, his voice low and calm, asking what she'd seen. She tried to explain between sobs, her words disjointed but desperate. The photograph spoke louder than she could. He studied it grimly before rising and signaling to his partner. They escorted her upstairs, their radios crackling, boots thudding heavily on the worn carpet of the stairwell. Mia's legs trembled as they approached her door, still wide open, the shadows inside her apartment spilling out into the hall. She wanted to turn away, to never step foot inside again, but the officers moved with methodical caution, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Stay behind us," one ordered. She obeyed, hugging the wall as they swept inside. The beam of light darted across the living room, over the couch, over the blanket. The officer's voice rang out, firm, commanding. "Police. If anyone's in here, show yourself now." Silence. The second officer moved to the couch, his hand resting on the grip of his gun. With his other hand, he hooked the edge of the blanket and yanked it back. The couch was empty. Just cushions, rumpled slightly, nothing more. Mia's stomach lurched. She knew what she'd seen. She knew it had moved. But there was nothing there. The officers moved through the apartment in practiced formation, checking every closet, every cabinet, every shadowed corner. They pulled open the bathroom curtain, looked under the bed, swept the balcony. Each search ended the same, empty. The apartment held nothing but her belongings, and yet the air still carried that wrongness, that faint trace of another presence. One officer crouched by the couch, running his hand over the cushions. He frowned, then held his flashlight closer. Fibers were pressed down, fresh indentations in the fabric, as though someone had been lying there only moments before. He glanced at Mia, then at his partner. Neither said anything, but their silence spoke volumes. "Who else has a key to your apartment?" the taller officer asked. "Just me," Mia whispered, her voice hoarse. "And the landlord. But he wouldn't." Her words faltered, the certainty gone. The officer nodded slowly. "We'll need to talk to him." Mia stood in the center of her apartment, feeling like a stranger in her own home. The thought of ever sleeping here again made her stomach twist. She rubbed her arms as if she could scrub away the invisible fingerprints left on every surface. The officers asked her more questions: when she first noticed things were off, how long she'd lived here, if anyone had been bothering her lately. She answered in fragments, her mind half absent, still listening for that phantom breathing. Then one of them called from the bedroom. "You're going to want to see this." They all gathered by the bed. The officer held up a small object he'd pulled from beneath the mattress. A camera, no larger than a fist, with a memory card still inside. Mia's legs nearly gave out. "Looks like he's been recording," the officer said grimly. He turned it over in his hands, examining the placement of tape residue, as if it had been mounted somewhere recently removed. Her skin crawled as she realized she had no idea how long it had been there, watching her as she changed clothes, as she slept, as she lived her private life believing she was alone. They bagged the camera carefully, promising to check its contents, but Mia couldn't hear their reassurances. Her mind was screaming, images flashing. The photo on the dresser, the eyes she thought she saw, the smudge on the window, the breathing. Whoever had been here hadn't just broken in once. They had been here again and again. The officers finished their sweep, reporting no one present. But the couch cushions, the stray hair in the bathroom, the camera, these were undeniable traces. Whoever it was, they were skilled at hiding, slipping in and out without leaving enough behind to catch them. Mia refused to stay another night. With shaking hands she stuffed clothes into a duffel bag while the police stood watch. Every zipper sounded too loud, every corner she turned too sharp, as if someone might leap out. The apartment she had decorated with warm lights and soft blankets felt like a crime scene now, a place where something had been watching her, breathing with her, existing in her most vulnerable moments. As she left with the officers, her bag slung over her shoulder, she couldn't help glancing back. The door gaped open, the shadows inside stretching like arms. She shuddered. On the street below, the night was quiet again, almost peaceful. But Mia knew peace was an illusion. Somewhere out there, whoever had taken that photo, whoever had hidden beneath her couch, was still breathing. Still watching, still waiting, and the worst part was the certainty that this wasn't over.